Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we're going to talk about the coach's paradox. So this is a very intriguing title, Austin. What do you have? What is the coach's paradox, and what do you have to say?
Yeah, so it's this, I find it a paradox because there appears to be two seemingly diametrically opposed things that when you're coaching and helping others grow or helping yourself grow, that you want to learn. And it almost seems like they fight each other. And one of them is, you'll see it in a lot of things, like phrases like turn up the good or make it easy, right? And, you want people to fall into the pit of success. So the environment is so well set up for a team that it's just easy for them to do the right thing, so set up your habits so it's easy to do the right thing. And then there's this other skill that I found very valuable in life and in technology and teams and all that, is the ability, like this kind of grit and the ability to get through hard things, right? And so I think this topic triggered for me once because we were having a meetup internally on facilitators and about how our role was to help make it easy for the conversation to go well, or the retrospective or the improvement. And then someone started making a joke about defacilitators, like, oh, well, what about making it hard for people, and but there is something that does occur to me, like, so if you imagine, if you're just focused on making it easy and making everything really well, I've seen this effect, and I've experienced it myself, and I've seen it in others. So let's say you're in an environment where it's really easy to have high quality practices and high quality product, and it's really easy to have high psychological safety. Those are always hard things in general, but you're in an environment where it's really easy to do that. And then you throw someone in a system where it's the complete opposite, right? You have all the anti-patterns going on. And I've seen people really struggle hardcore with that. And I myself have struggled really hardcore with that. And part of me wonders, like, is there something we can do to help people prepare to do hard things? Like coach in a situation where things are going against you, or where, I've even thought of, I'm coaching sports teams now, and there's some cultures of teams where screaming and yelling and high pressure stuff is how they operate. And if I create an environment that doesn't have that, am I preparing them to be an environment that's not, so that's kind of the paradox in a nutshell. And I'm not exactly sure where to take it or what the solution is. So what are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, because it's So the idea of grit, right, making it through something hard. So I think in general, some things don't necessarily need to be harder than they are, right? So software development is already hard without the people problems, right? Yeah. And so there is that aspect of it where it's like, okay, well, if we make it easy, is it just making it easy, or is it actually providing more grit bandwidth for somebody to do something else that's hard in a different way, right? So is it lean waste, right? So like that. So is the difficulty just lean waste, or is it providing value, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a little bit of it. But then there's also this, if you have everything be easy for you all the time. I've heard the term snowplow parents before, where they like just get everything out of the way of their kid, and then their kid when they kind of move out on their own, they have no idea how to do anything for themselves. And so I think that that's something to be really careful about. You reminded me of a story where we had an intern who did a lot of agile development with us, and then went to an interview and didn't know what Scrum was. And it's like, and he was saying he is agile, and the employer was like, oh, well, agile is Scrum, right? Which we know that's not true, but but they didn't know. And then on top of that, they didn't know how to estimate anything, because they didn't do any estimates with us. And so so are they unprepared or not, and what are the answers? So like, one, we could just do Scrum and estimation and make them prepared for the rest of the world that way. I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not. But I think what we have started doing is priming people. So basically saying, okay, now that your internship is over, we're going to give you a crash course in estimation and Scrum. And just so that you know what it is and you can answer the interview questions. And so like that is another approach to it. And so maybe for the coaching sports teams analogy, it's like, hey, by the way, other sports teams from now on, your coach might yell at you a whole lot more. Like that primer might just be enough, right?
Yeah. No, I like the tie-in, and it's probably very nuanced, and it depends on a lot of context and situation. But here's a hypothesis that I want to throw out to you, because it's very half-baked at this moment. But I'm wondering if there's this kind of flow from, let's say you're coaching a team or a person or even an organization. Like if you kind of go through the habit cycle of make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying, and then as they're ready, make it hard. So, and I had to explain that a little bit, where you're kind of going back to learning and going at the fluent edge, right? And so if you want people to have good habits, right? And I think that's a very strong thing, kind of in classical philosophy, it's like virtue ethics, right? Where you naturally do the right thing. Those are really good habits to have, whether it's coding habits, it's like built into your fingers and the way you operate and think. So I think you really want to build up all those strong habits. But let's go to the person example, because that's much easier. Let's say I'm coaching, someone, and they've been in a really good environment. They built up great habits. They're influencing others in this environment. The make it hard step might be like, you're doing a great job in this environment. I know of a team over here where they're struggling with a lot of things. What do you think about joining that team and helping them? So you're basically encouraging them to get into a situation where they're going to need grit. They're going to need, to do hard things. And maybe not as a coach, maybe as a developer, like, how to do test-driven development for yourself, even if no one is doing it around you, right? And have the grit and ability to do that. Even if other things in the system might be going in the opposite direction, how to influence in that tough situation. Yeah. So there's a hypothesis that
so I totally agree with that, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Even yesterday, I was talking to a few people, and it was literally like, oh, this feels very comfortable. And I'm like, well, then you're kind of doing it wrong, because the comfort is where the learning kind of stops, right? You have to be slightly uncomfortable all of the time. Mm-hmm. And so that might be like the inverse of the fluent edge, is just like minor discomfort. Like, somebody put, a individual pee in your bed spread or whatever. Now you can't sleep right, or something along those lines. But the idea, or your chair is mildly uncomfortable, right? So like if your chair is mildly uncomfortable, then you're more alert and you're more aware of the things around you, right? But if your chair is really comfortable, then you kind of close inward and you're kind of like a little bit sleepy or whatever. And so there is this argument for like minor discomfort all the time, because then you're not really exploring, right? You're kind of living in your comfort zone, and the comfort zone is kind of where those improvements go to die, right? So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. And so I think what I'll do is I'm gonna sabotage your chair, and so you'll be slightly uncomfortable. Yeah.
Middle line 52. I don't really.
Yeah. So I think I like this as a hypothesis, and I think it depends, right? Like how you would apply it, right? So, I think there's certain things like putting someone in an environment where there's more challenges, right? That feels more good than, hey, let's intentionally practice. We're delivering daily and we're delivering in small increments. Let's intentionally practice month-long Scrum just so you know how to do it. That feels like might introduce waste and problems for the organization to teach it, right? Or going back to the kids example, I'm going to start yelling at you more in practice so you get what this is like for a month. You know what I mean? And so, there's certain things where it seems like you can kind of push them into the deep end and let them experience the grit. And then other things, I'm not sure what you do with that. Maybe it's what you said earlier, where it's just awareness of there's environments not like this. And what would it look like to practice that? I don't even know. Like going with, like the, coaching example for sports, like maybe I have a coach join a practice who's not abusive, but like, pushing it a little bit with his intensity, just so the kids are used to that a little bit. I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm totally, yeah.
A couple things I'm reminded of. One is
Yeah.
the Edward Deming red bead experiment.
Yes.
Right? So that's like, you're just getting yelled at like, oh my God, like, this is horrible. Theory X management, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is like the best book I've read on this topic is Angela Duckworth's Grit. The title is Grit. And in that book, she talks a lot about grit as a predictor for success. So it's like, one person can be way more intelligent than the other, but the grittier person of the two will actually be the more successful one, and other things along those lines. And so I actually think that it's a separate skill set. And so I think that the person that could get yelled at in football or whatever would, sports, I guess, like sports for me have all the same name, like, whatever the names of the sports are. And so they could get yelled at, but like, I think that a gritty person, right, somebody that's learned grit before from something else in their life will do better in that environment. And so I think that in the book Grit, I think it's like grit is something you can develop as a muscle and be more and more gritty and establish longer habits and fight through kind of challenging times. And I think that's different from just being thrown into the deep end. I think throwing them into the deep end is a test of who is gritty and who is not right now, right? And that's so I think that and that's like the explanation of growth mindset versus fixed mindset in the book Grit. Because so if somebody's of a fixed mindset and they are not gritty at the moment, then they will drop out, like they will bail, right? And so you show up to your sport, or you show up to your your group of coders, and you say, like, I'm here, and then you just get yelled at, laid into. The red bean, the manager from the red bean experiment comes up and just starts yelling at you. Then you're going to, it'll just test your current level of grit. But you can learn grit, right? And so you can identify who's currently not gritty, and then work with them to improve them. And I think that that's a little bit different. And so I suspect that, in the scenario where they like went to the scrum team, they're super disheartened by this interview that they just had because they didn't know what it was. It was not because, it's not, they didn't take it as like, this was just one challenge in many I'll face in the future. It wasn't a growth mindset thing, right? It was very fixed mindset. Like, I don't know this, I'm never going to get a job, even though I did this internship and it's their fault because blah, blah, right? And so I think that distinguishing the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset in terms of grit, and separating that from tests of grit, right? Because at any one point, your grit can be tested, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so you join that team and your coach yells at you and it's really hard. That's only going to test how much grit you have learned so far in your life.
Yeah. So, and we are coming close on time, but I guess I am curious, like, what would be a way to help someone grow in grit, I suppose? Like, that's, I'm not sure if I've thought about that before. Maybe I've thought about it as it occurs naturally, like almost going back to the parenting analogy you have earlier, is something hard comes up in life. It's something I'm thankful for my parents that they did is, let's say, a difficult teacher that's not easy to learn from or work with. Instead of them just removing me from the class, they'd be like, well, how can you learn how to be in this class and learn as much as you can from this teacher, who is objectively difficult or you perceive as difficult? And so like stuff naturally comes up where you can kind of coach someone to work through it. But almost what you were saying, it was almost like, oh, yeah, you can do this grit kata. I don't know. Like,
well, no. So Angela Duckworth does go over that. So
okay.
There's two things that I think were really good. I recommend the book to anyone. And she has a number of talks online and stuff. So the first one was, she talks a lot about just playing an instrument as a kid, and her parents making her do that. And that was grit training essentially, right? So it's like, oh, I don't sound like the amazing person sounds. I sound like a beginner.
Right.
And then but even before that, it's just learning growth mindset, right? So so if you learn an instrument right now and you do not have, and you have a fixed mindset, then the grit kata will fail right away, right? Like I am not good now. I will never become better, right? Like that's the fixed mindset. And so you know, you rewind that back to the growth mindset, and then, you know, okay, now I know I can learn more over time, and I will do my instrument over a long period of time. And so you've learned growth mindset, and from there developed grit, right? And so and that's why I really like the book, is because she explains that really well and talks about how different organizations train for grit. And you know, there's some good content around there about really, you know, high-end schools that that will actually test for grit before taking them into the school, because then they know that their success rate with the students goes way up. That of course is a grit test, like I was talking about. And so they're saying by the time you're university age or out of high school, you needed to have developed all this grit. And so often sports teams will filter for grit, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they learned to be gritty there. And so anyway, I found it all very interesting, but like that's my mindset around it.
Okay.
It's, you know, number one, growth mindset. And if they don't have that, then you don't go to grit yet. But if it's growth mindset and needs grit, then learn something hard, like an instrument or something like that, and just develop. And then when you encounter a test of grit, you'll be prepared and you can move past that test. Like, you know, I have a new manager, and that manager is a jerk, you know, but I can change this organization now because I know how to change organization. Like that. That's the sort of stuff that that comes to mind.
And so I have one more thing that fired that I want to share, and then we got to close. But is it kind of goes back, you know, we've had many conversations with guests and things on the tie-in between modeling and education and things like that. And I think this grit thing ties in big time, because a lot of times, like, things you learn in dedicated learning time or in your own life on the side are all tests of grit. So like the music example you gave is great, which is why, like, kind of like classically thinking in education, music is usually a part of it. And I've also heard that math as a grit teacher before, or as an ability to focus, right? So this is hard. It takes a lot of system 2 effort to like methodically think through something and learn a skill and then apply it. And so all those sort of things can help develop grit in particular ways. And so it's almost like you have these katas or things you do on the side to be good at a skill. For example, grit when the moment comes, right? You just don't, to pick up your favorite sports analogy, Chris, you know, so it's not like you're in a baseball game and you just show up to bat with no practice, right? And just hope to hit a home run. You gotta put in the practice time, right? And so, but I think we're at time, so I'm gonna go ahead and close it. So we thanks for overhearing our discussion on this topic on the coach's paradox. We'd love to hear your opinions on this. What your take is, when to make things easy, when to make it harder. How does all that work? How do you work through this paradox? What are your resources that you found valuable with it? Please like and subscribe, share on YouTube. We'd love to see your feedback on YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and more. And until next time, have a good one, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.